Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Damien V, and today we're going to be looking at part 3 of the chess tournament. It's a 7-0 Blitz tournament, and this was not a FIDE like official tournament. It was just a small community kind of deal. So let's just say they didn't pair the same ratings very well. It was kind of just a gamble on who you got. So some of the games were very well matched between players, but some of them were a bit. You'd get like beginners facing a higher intermediates, so it was a little bit of a gamble on that. So I got the black pieces in this game, my opponent with the white, and this game was again a bit shorter, and you'll kind of see why. My opponent immediately opened up with h4. Now I actually got worried for this, and for really anybody above 700 will know that's not a good opening, usually. But I was worried that my opponent was trying to do something like the crab and get me with some dumb trick that I just wasn't prepared for, because, I mean, let's be honest, who prepares for h4? So I just played standard development, and he pushed h5. Now I knew that my opponent did not prepare any kind of tricks, and he was probably just a lower rated player. So stopped it, and he immediately blundered. So punished the blunder, and I knew I was in for a bit of an easy game, but you always want to keep your guard up. You never want to lose a game that you should have easily won. Plays up, and I simply play back, again guarding the central pawn from attack. Again, a couple standard moves, and he plays a4 now. So again, as the rule goes, you do not want to push these pawns until you secure a center with your other pawns and get these pieces developed. You don't want to go for this right away. Unless you're Magnus Carlsen or Hikaru Nakamura, you're not going to be playing something like this, right? So I continue, again, adding a protector to this because I eventually want to move my queen out of the way, or at least get the king out of the center. I've got this wonderful diagonal if I can get the knight away. I got a couple options for the queen on this side. I got a battery going on this way. So I'm looking at a lot of different options. Just want to get this protected. He plays again with the rook. Again, not developing these pieces out. He's not getting these anywhere. Not getting the king safe. He's just guarded pretty much with just one pawn. I capture a free piece hanging, and he moves the rook. Now, so let's analyze this position. I mean, this is a pretty easy position for, higher ups, but, for any of my beginners watching, should I take, or should I, just continue to play elsewhere? What is the best option here? Well, I could take here. It's a free pawn. And I'm not really losing anything. This isn't under any threat. I've got, a couple protectors of it. But what do I get from taking here, right? Obviously, you usually don't want to give up the bishop pair for a knight. So is this worth anything? Well, let's check. If he takes back with the rook, he had to move the rook here and then moved it over another time, essentially losing the tempo. So if I take here, this move was a waste, and he just has to move again. If I take here, and he takes back with the pawn, his pawn chain's broken, his king's exposed, and it's just ultimately worse for white. So this is free, but I don't really need to worry much about this pawn. It's not threatening anything. I can always move up and take later on. And it's always guarding the rook from moving over here and trying to do anything funny on the h file. So even though this is free, I really don't have much use for it. Let me just get this knight out of the way while I can. So correct answer is take the knight, and he makes a mistake. Again, you don't want to capture away from the center like this. You want to keep your pawns chained. Doubled pawns are fine in some instances, but intentionally doing this when you could keep it is not the way to go. So he blunders again. I castle, get my king out of the way. Again, his king is stuck in the middle, and now, since he moved those two rooks, even though he got them, even though he has this piece now out and fighting, rather than mine, which is kind of stuck back here, he lost his castling privileges because of that way. And he, even though my rook might not be doing much, I now have, a couple pieces that are more in the game. I have this rook that's now in the game. I have much more development than he does. He's stuck back here because all he did was push his rooks. Couple more development moves. And again, he's pushing his pawns without bringing in any extra development, without any help. This is not the way to go. I could take, it's not guarded, but again, just like this pawn, this one's not actually posing a threat. Actually, this one's helping me. This queen might threaten this later on in the game. Of course, the knight is there blocking it right now, but should this knight be traded, Like, should we trade these knights later on? I don't want any idea of the queen coming here to take this. When I castle queenside, my king isn't on b8 to guard this pawn. So this actually is now used as a blockade. His queen is now stopped by his own piece. Moves the knight up. I take, and again, he has the... Sorry about that. Had a quick computer issue. I'm back now. Again, he has the ability to take in and reconnect his pawn chain. Get this nice 3-pawn chain going on in the middle, and get his king behind a pawn. Again, he blunders. That is not the way to go. I move up, create some tension. Really have no intention of capturing this piece and doubling up my pawns, but, adding the tension, getting this out of the way for potentially open files, and for this piece to queen is just always good. So he moves down. At the moment, his rook is guarding this. So, well, you can see the chess engine is telling me to play here. But why? You always want to look at why. That's how you get better in the game. So why would the chess engine tell you to play up? Well, as you can see, this pawn is still guarded by two pieces. So this rook has no threat to it. The other thing is once I move this pawn up, right, to here, pawn guards these, pawn guards these. I now have complete control of the center, right? And his rook either has to go back, way out of the way, and with the pawn here, I now have a double attack on this pawn. So by playing this up, right, this has to move, and he loses this. So it's a double threat, essentially. So this is always what you want to be looking at. Any of my beginners out there, always check what you can unlock just by playing a move, right? So up. He plays away. Again, yes, this is double threatened. This is threatened twice, and I only have one protector. But I'm not really concerned about that because if he decides to capture here, I now have a passed pawn, and I have a bunch of protectors to guard the queening square. So I'm not really concerned about this being an issue. I go ahead and take that piece. Again, it was free now that I moved the pawn up. He goes, and he's now down the exchange and lost that. So now he only has one attacker here, one defender. Now this is no longer even close to being an issue, and I'm just up, right? Also, that's going to fall later on. He blunders and opens his position up. Again, he's not moving his king out of the square, and there's just this funnel right towards the king, right? And he's only got one piece on each side that can easily be pinned. Bring the bishop in. The idea for this move is I want to trade queens. I'm up the exchange. I have 2 pieces up the exchange, actually, and a couple pawns. So I want to trade. He gets his bishop, again, blundered. Take it, plays up. I take the piece, because again, I'm still guarding this file. He plays, and I trade the queens. So at this point, the game, well, I mean, the game is pretty much decided a while ago, but once this move hits, the game's 100% completed, because you can't move the king, and moving anything else, I'll just take the queen. I want the exchange, and now I've forced it. So now that the exchange is forced, he has no minor pieces left. I have 3, and this game is essentially decided. There's nothing he can do. A couple moves later, I take the pawn. Now I'm running a passed pawn, and the benefit of this is not that I actually intend to make a queen here, but the threat of this means that he has to move his king this way. And every time that he doesn't move his king that way, I start playing attacking the rest of the pawns. Let me, I'm mistaken that. Every time he moves his king away from this, then I move another piece up and just punish him for moving his king away. So he has to move his king this way every single time and give up the protection of each of these pieces. A couple pawn moves later, and now his king is actually too slow because he moved these pawns up. Now you may be asking, why is he too slow? Well, this is actually a really good learning opportunity for any beginners. There is this old rule, right? If you check a pawn to the back rank like this and make a little box, if the king is outside of that box, he can't guard the queening square. So as you can see, if I make a diagonal like this, the king is not in this last 3 files here. The king won't be able to guard that, regardless of anything else. If the king was here, I could, right? I move up, he moves here, I move up, and he takes. But that's true for anything. So this pawn right here, like, let's say this, this rook didn't exist. If the king was anywhere outside of this box, the king wouldn't be able to guard the pawn from the queening square. So if the king was right here and this pawn was here, I'd be able to make it. So that's just a quick way for anybody to, analyze just in a time situation if their piece is able to make it to the end, is just check that diagonal. So now he's too slow, and I queen. The game's essentially decided now, just make a few more checks, and I go for a simple approach. Anytime, yeah, I could, do a bunch of just fancy stuff, but I mean, I have a queen, so I might as well just treat it like a queen and king in game, and just start pushing his king back over and over again. Really doesn't have a lot of moves left to go. I move the bishop back because I don't want this square covered. If he ends up pushing everything and has nowhere left to move, I don't want this square stopped and cause a stalemate. So I want him to be able to go all the way to these last 2 squares. That's why I moved the bishop back. So he moves, treat it like a king and queen endgame, push a couple more pawns. And something to look at here is if he ends up pushing this, he has nowhere to go. That's a stalemate. So even though I am up and it's saying checkmate in 1, right? You have to be certain that you're not stalemating. Even if you're up this much pieces, you have to be certain that you're not stalemating. And of course he plays it. I could have checkmated here, but in time trouble, I just went ahead and took the pawn, because that's mate. He moves, and it's mate. So, yeah, it was an easier game, lower ranked player, but, you always want to respect the fundamentals. Even in these late games here, right? You don't want to cause, you don't want to cause stalemates. And that's just a dumb way of losing all of the work. So that was game 3. Thank you for watching, and join me back for game 4. And I'll see you then.